A street dog leads a woman to a hidden treasure, but what they find during their search changes both their lives in the most unexpected ways. Lauren adjusted the strap of her bag, its weight pressing into her shoulder, a reminder of the art supplies she carried but rarely used these days. Her pace slowed as she neared the quiet, dimly lit street that led to her apartment. The walk home was always the same: empty sidewalks, cracked pavement, and the distant hum of traffic. Her thoughts were louder than the city's faint echoes, circling back to the rejection email she'd read earlier. Another gallery uninterested in her work. Another reminder that her dream of making it as an artist was slipping further away. She was about to cross the street when a sharp bark broke through a haze of self-pity. Startled, she turned to see a scruffy dog standing a few feet away. His coat was a patchwork of tan and white, his fur matted and clinging to him like he'd just emerged from a muddy adventure. The dog's eyes, bright and alert, locked onto hers. "Not today," Buddy Lauren muttered, her voice tinged with exhaustion. She took a step forward, hoping he'd lose interest and trot off. Instead, the dog followed. "Shoo," she said, waving her hand weakly. The dog barked again, a short, sharp sound that made it clear he had no intention of leaving her alone. Lauren stopped, placing her hands on her hips. "Look, I don't have food, and I'm not in the mood for company. Go on." The dog tilted his head, one floppy ear perking up as if he was genuinely considering her words. Then, as if deciding she needed him more than he needed her, he closed the distance between them, his tail wagging tentatively. Lauren sighed, crouching down. "You're not going to give up, are you?" She reached out, and he sniffed her hand cautiously before pressing his damp nose into her palm. His warmth caught her off guard, a simple, unspoken connection that tugged at something deep inside her. "All right, fine," she said, standing. "You can walk with me. But don't get any ideas. This is a one-time deal." The dog barked again, this time softer, almost as if he was agreeing to her terms. Together, they continued down the street. Lauren noticed how the dog kept glancing up at her, as though ensuring she wasn't going to disappear. Despite herself, she felt a flicker of curiosity. Who was this dog? Where had he come from? When they reached her apartment building, Lauren paused at the front steps. She turned to the dog, who sat down obediently, his tail sweeping the ground. "This is where we part ways," she said, gesturing toward the street. The dog didn't move. He stared at her with unwavering determination, his eyes pleading in a way that was impossible to ignore. Seriously, Lauren rubbed her temples. "You're really pushing your luck." A low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance, and the dog flinched. His ears flattened against his head, and he let out a soft whimper. "Oh, come on," Lauren muttered, glancing at the darkening sky. "You're killing me here." She opened the door and stepped inside, holding it open for a moment longer than necessary. The dog hesitated, then padded in after her, his nails clicking softly against the tile floor. Up in her apartment, Lauren tossed her bag onto the couch and turned to face her unexpected guest. "Okay, ground rules," she said, pointing a finger at him. "You stay on the rug. No jumping on the furniture, no chewing on anything, and definitely no peeing inside." The dog tilted his head again, as if considering her demands. Then he wandered over to the rug and curled up, his tail tucked neatly around him. Lauren stared at him for a moment, unsure whether to be impressed or suspicious. She grabbed a clean towel from the bathroom and knelt beside him. "Let's get some of that dirt off you," she said, gently rubbing his fur. He squirmed a bit at first, but soon settled, his eyes closing as if he hadn't felt kindness in a long time. As she worked, her fingers brushed against something hard and metallic beneath his fur. Frowning, she parted the matted hair and found an old leather collar with a small brass tag. The tag was scratched and tarnished, the writing almost illegible. "Hold still," Lauren murmured, carefully unfastening the collar. She turned it over in her hands, studying the worn leather and faint etchings. Then she noticed a small, hidden compartment sewn into the underside. Curiosity sparked. She pried it open with her nails. Inside was a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. Lauren's breath caught as she unfolded it, revealing what appeared to be a hand-drawn map. "What in the world?" she whispered. The lines and symbols were intricate, almost too precise to be random. There were no words, just markings that seemed to point to a specific location. The dog nudged her arm, breaking her concentration. He barked softly, his eyes fixed on the map, as if urging her to pay attention. Lauren looked at him, then back at the map. A strange feeling settled over her, a mix of apprehension and intrigue. "What is this?" she asked, not expecting an answer. The dog barked again, louder this time, and stood up. He paced in circles, his tail wagging furiously, before running to the door and back to her. "You want me to follow you?" Lauren asked, half laughing at the absurdity of the situation. But something about the dog's behavior felt deliberate, almost purposeful. She glanced at the map again, her fingers tracing its lines. "All right," she said, standing. "Let's see where this takes us." The dog barked once, his tail wagging like he'd just won a long argument. Lauren grabbed her coat and slipped the map into her pocket. As they stepped out into the night, the dog took the lead, his pace confident and unyielding. For the first time in weeks, Lauren felt a spark of hope. It wasn't about the map or where it might lead. It was about the unexpected bond forming between her and this mysterious dog, a connection that felt like the start of something she couldn't quite put into words. And so, with a mix of hesitation and determination, she followed him into the unknown. Lauren followed the dog, whom she'd now dubbed Toby, through the quiet streets. His pace was steady, as if he knew exactly where they were going. Lauren couldn't help but wonder about the odd map folded in her pocket. Its existence was peculiar enough, but the dog's insistence, his urgency, made her even more curious. Toby glanced back at her every few steps, his brown eyes checking to make sure she was still there. The dim streetlights cast long shadows, but the dog moved confidently, guiding her deeper into an unfamiliar part of the neighborhood. Lauren had lived in this city for years, yet she didn't recognize the streets Toby was leading her to. "Toby," she said aloud, half to herself, "what's your story, huh? Did someone lose you? Or did you escape?" The dog, of course, didn't answer, but his ears twitched at her voice. They came to a stop in front of a chain-link fence surrounding an overgrown lot. The once sturdy gate was hanging off its hinges, barely attached. Behind it, wild grass and shrubs choked what might have been a park or garden long ago. A few rusty playground structures peeked through the foliage, hinting at its forgotten purpose. Toby sat by the gate and barked softly, his gaze fixed on Lauren. "You want me to go in there?" she asked, staring at the dark, tangled lot. He barked again, then scratched at the gate with his paw. Lauren hesitated, glancing around the deserted street. The neighborhood was eerily quiet, with only the occasional hum of distant traffic. She shifted her weight, debating the wisdom of following a dog into a place that looked like it hadn't seen human activity in decades. But something about the map in her pocket and Toby's insistence compelled her forward. With a resigned sigh, she pushed the gate open, its metal screeching in protest. The overgrowth made it difficult to navigate, but Toby weaved through it effortlessly, stopping every few feet to make sure Lauren was keeping up. She stumbled over a hidden root, cursing under her breath, but pressed on. "Toby, if I break my ankle out here, you better know how to dial 911, she muttered. The dog let out a low whine, pausing in front of what looked like an old stone bench, half buried in vines. He pawed at the ground near its base, barking sharply. "What is it?" Lauren crouched down beside him, brushing aside the vines and dirt. Her fingers touched something cold and hard, a metallic surface. She dug deeper, her hands quickly coated in dirt, until she uncovered a small metal box. It was heavy and tarnished, with a simple latch keeping it shut. Her heart raced as she lifted it, brushing away the last bits of soil. "What is this?" she whispered, glancing at Toby. The dog wagged his tail furiously, his excitement almost contagious. Taking a deep breath, Lauren opened the latch. Inside was a folded stack of papers, yellowed with age, along with a handful of faded photographs. She picked up the first paper, her fingers trembling slightly. It was a handwritten note. "To whomever finds this, know that this place was once a sanctuary for those in need. Take care of its memory and let it bring light once more." The cryptic words made Lauren's mind race. She picked up one of the photographs next. It showed a group of people standing in front of a community garden, their faces beaming with pride. In the corner of the photo, written in delicate cursive, were the words "The Green Haven Project, 1984. Lauren sat back on her heels, processing what she'd found. Toby nudged her arm with his nose, his tail thumping against the ground. "This is incredible," she said softly, looking at him. "But why you? Why now?" The dog barked once, as if answering her question, and Lauren couldn't help but smile. She packed the papers and photos back into the box, tucking the map in alongside them. Standing, she looked down at Toby. "All right, boy, you've got my attention. Let's figure out what this all means." Toby wagged his tail in approval, trotting ahead as if there was still more to uncover, and Lauren, against all logic, decided she would follow him wherever he led. Lauren stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the metal box on the counter. Its contents were spread out in front of her yellowed papers, faded photographs, and the mysterious map that had led her and Toby to the overgrown lot the night before. The cryptic note still lingered in her thoughts. Take care of its memory and let it bring light once more. She traced a finger over one of the photos, a group of smiling people standing in front of lush greenery. Their faces exuded pride and warmth, but none of them looked familiar. What was this place, and why was it abandoned? She muttered under her breath. Toby sat at her feet, watching her with curious eyes. He let out a soft whine, as though urging her to take the next step. "I don't know," Boy Lauren said, crouching down to scratch behind his ears. "This feels way bigger than me. What am I supposed to do with this?" Toby leaned into her touch, his tail wagging slightly. His quiet companionship was enough to quell her doubts for the moment. Lauren's phone buzzed on the counter, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a text from her best friend, Claire. "Don't forget. Coffee at 10. You promised." She groaned, realizing she was already running late. Gathering up the papers and photos, she placed them carefully back into the box. "All right, Toby," she said, grabbing her bag. "Let's take this mystery with us. Claire might have some ideas." Toby followed her eagerly as they made their way to the local cafe. The small shop was already buzzing with morning chatter when they arrived. Claire, a whirlwind of energy with curly red hair and a knack for sarcasm, waved her over from a corner table. "You brought a dog," Claire said as Lauren approached, her voice equal parts amused and surprised. "Long story," Lauren replied, sitting down and placing the metal box on the table. Toby settled at her feet, drawing the attention of nearby customers with his soulful eyes. Claire raised an eyebrow. "So, what's in the box? It looks like you're smuggling ancient secrets." Funny you should say that. Lauren opened the box and began laying out its contents. She recounted the previous night's events, from finding the map in Toby's collar to uncovering the buried box in the abandoned lot. Claire listened intently, her playful demeanor giving way to genuine curiosity. "This is wild," Claire said, picking up one of the photographs. "The Green Haven Project. I think I've heard of this. It was some kind of community garden back in the day, right? My mum used to talk about it." "Do you know what happened to it?" Lauren asked, leaning forward eagerly. Claire shook her head. "Not really. I just remember her saying it was important to a lot of people, especially those who were struggling. She said it gave them hope." She set the photograph down and frowned. "But I think it got shut down. Something about funding or city politics." Lauren glanced at Toby, who seemed to be listening just as intently. "I feel like I'm supposed to do something about this," she said quietly. "But I don't know where to start." Claire leaned back in her chair, tapping her fingers against her coffee cup. "Well, for starters, you need to figure out who these people are," she said, gesturing to the photos. "And maybe find out more about the project itself. There's got to be some record of it somewhere." Lauren nodded, feeling a surge of determination. "You're right. This isn't just some random find. It means something." Claire grinned. "That's the spirit. And if you need help, you know I'm your girl." Over the next few days, Lauren dove headfirst into research, She visited the local library, poring over old newspapers and city records. She searched online forums and community pages, hoping to find someone who remembered the Green Haven project. Toby was her constant companion, sitting patiently by her side as she sifted through stacks of papers and scrolled through endless web pages. It wasn't long before she hit her first breakthrough. An old article in the library archives detailed the Green Haven project's origins. It had been founded in the 1980s by a woman named Margaret Hayes, a social worker who believed in the power of community and nature to heal. The garden had provided food, shelter, and a sense of belonging to those in need. But as Claire had suspected, the project had been shut down due to funding cuts and pressure from developers. Lauren felt a pang of sadness as she read Margaret's words in the article. This garden isn't just about plants, it's about people, it's about hope. She glanced at Toby, who was lying at her feet with his head resting on his paws. "We have to bring this back," she said softly. Her resolve deepened when she found a letter in the box addressed to Margaret Hayes. It was unsigned, but the heartfelt words spoke of gratitude and admiration for her work. Lauren realized that the garden had touched countless lives, and its memory deserved to be preserved. With a clearer goal in mind, Lauren decided to visit the site again. She wanted to see if there were any remnants of the garden that could be salvaged. Claire offered to come along, and the three of them set out on a sunny afternoon. The lot was just as overgrown as Lauren remembered, but this time she saw it through new eyes. She imagined what it might have looked like in its prime: vibrant flowers, rows of vegetables, and people coming together to tend to the earth. "This place has potential," Claire said, brushing aside a tangle of vines to reveal an old wooden sign. The faded lettering read Green Haven Community Garden. It's like it's waiting for someone to bring it back to life. Lauren felt a swell of determination. "We're going to do this," she said firmly. "We're going to restore it." Toby barked in agreement, his tail wagging furiously. Claire placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not doing this alone, you know. We'll figure it out together." Lauren smiled, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in years. She didn't know how they were going to pull it off, but for the first time, she believed they could. With Toby by her side and Claire's unwavering support, she felt ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. This was no longer just about solving a mystery or uncovering a hidden treasure. It was about giving life to something that had been lost, and in doing so, finding her own sense of belonging. And as she stood in the overgrown lot, she realized that Toby hadn't just led her to a hidden treasure, he'd led her to a new beginning. The lot was a tangle of wild greenery, with vines creeping over old benches and saplings sprouting through cracks in the pavement. Yet, as Lauren and Claire explored further, it became clear that this forgotten corner of the city held remnants of its past purpose. Rusted gardening tools peeked out from under layers of dirt, and broken trellises leaned against a crumbling shed. Everything here whispered of neglect, but also of possibility. Toby trotted ahead, his nose to the ground. Every so often, he barked sharply, urging them to follow. "It's like he's got a sixth sense for this place," Claire said, stepping over a patch of brambles. "I know," Lauren replied, watching Toby with a mix of amusement and amazement. "It's like he knows exactly why we're here." They followed Toby to the center of the lot, where a large, gnarled tree stood. Its roots pushed through the ground in twisting patterns, forming natural arches. Beneath the tree, a patch of earth seemed recently disturbed, as if someone or something had dug there before. Toby stopped, wagging his tail furiously and pawing at the ground. Lauren crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" she asked, brushing away the loose soil with her hands. Her fingers hit something solid, a wooden plank, weathered but intact. "Help me with this," she called to Claire, who rushed over. Together, they lifted the plank, revealing a shallow hole. Inside was a small chest, its brass fittings tarnished and its lid slightly ajar. Lauren's heart raced as she reached for it, the anticipation almost overwhelming. "This is it," she whispered, lifting the chest out and setting it on the ground. Claire leaned in close. "Open it," she urged. Lauren hesitated for a moment, then flipped the latch. The lid creaked as it opened, revealing an assortment of items that took her breath away. There were notebooks filled with handwritten entries, sketches of garden layouts, and pressed flowers carefully preserved between sheets of wax paper. Among them was a faded photograph of Margaret Hayes standing proudly in front of a flourishing Green Haven garden, surrounded by smiling faces. This is incredible, Lauren said, her voice barely above a whisper. Claire picked up one of the notebooks, flipping through its pages. These are her plans, she said, her eyes widening. It's all here, the planting schedules, the outreach programs, even her notes on how to involve the community. Lauren pulled out a small, ornate box nestled within the chest. Opening it, she found a collection of letters, each written on delicate stationery and tied with a faded ribbon. She read the first one aloud. Dear Margaret, thank you for believing in me when no one else did. This garden gave me a second chance at life, and I'll never forget what you've done for me. Lauren's voice caught, and she placed the letter back in the box. This isn't just a garden, it's a legacy, she said, her throat tight with emotion. Toby barked softly, as if affirming her words. Claire nodded, her expression serious. This isn't something we can let disappear. We have to do something with this. Lauren looked around at the overgrown lot, her mind spinning with possibilities. We will, she said firmly. We're going to bring it back. The rest of the afternoon was spent cataloguing the contents of the chest. Each item told a story of the people who had worked the soil, of the struggles they had faced, and of the joy they had found in their shared purpose. By the time they finished, the sun was dipping low on the horizon, casting the lot in a warm, golden light. As they packed up to leave, Lauren felt a renewed sense of determination. The Green Haven garden wasn't just a piece of history, it was a testament to what people could achieve when they came together. And now, thanks to Toby, she had the chance to restore it. She glanced down at him, her scruffy companion who had somehow become her guide in more ways than one. You knew all along, didn't you, she said, scratching behind his ears. Toby wagged his tail, his eyes shining with loyalty and understanding. As they walked back to the car, Lauren felt the weight of the chest in her arms. It was more than just wood and paper, it was a treasure of stories, a bridge to the past, and a beacon for the future. And with Toby by her side, she was ready to uncover what lay ahead. The next morning, Lauren stood in front of the Green Haven lot with Toby at her side. The chest from their discovery sat safely in her car, but the items inside weren't just relics anymore, they were tools for something greater. She hadn't slept much, her mind buzzing with plans and questions. Who could she turn to for help? What would it take to breathe life back into this forgotten place? Claire arrived shortly after, a clipboard in hand and a grin on her face. All right, boss, she said. I did some digging. Turns out the city council has a historical preservation fund. If we can prove that this garden has cultural or historical significance, we might be able to get funding. Lauren raised an eyebrow. You really didn't waste any time, did you? Of course not, Claire replied. This is a project worth fighting for. Plus, I needed a good excuse to skip work today. Together, they began assessing the lot, making notes about the state of the structures and brainstorming ways to clear the overgrowth. Toby darted around, his tail wagging as he explored his favorite new playground. As they worked, an elderly man approached, leaning heavily on a cane. His steps were slow, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the lot with curiosity. You two planning to do something with this place, he asked, his voice rough but kind. Lauren smiled. That's the idea. Do you know anything about it? The man nodded, his gaze softening. I do. Used to come here every week, back when Margaret ran it. She was a force of nature, that woman. Always had a kind word and a shovel in hand, he chuckled, then sighed. Shame what happened to it. Lauren exchanged a glance with Claire. What did happen, she asked. Developers, the man replied bitterly. They wanted this land for some fancy apartments. Margaret fought tooth and nail to keep it, but she couldn't do it alone. When the funding dried up, so did the garden. Lauren felt a pang of sadness. Did she ever talk about what it meant to her? Why she started it? The man's eyes grew distant, as if remembering something from long ago. She always said that gardens were a way to grow more than just food. Said they could grow hope, community, even second chances. She believed it with all her heart. Lauren nodded, the man's words stirring something deep within her. Thank you, she said. We're trying to bring that back. If you know anyone who might want to help, send them our way. The man smiled. You'll have my hands, at least, shaky as they are, and I know a few folks who'd be glad to pitch in. As he shuffled away, Lauren felt a renewed sense of purpose. The garden wasn't just a project, it was a promise. She looked down at Toby, who wagged his tail as if he understood. You really did lead me to something special, she said softly. Over the next few days, word began to spread. Former volunteers and neighbors stopped by, each sharing stories of how the garden had touched their lives. One woman brought a photo of her father working the soil, while another recounted how the garden's produce had helped feed her family during hard times. Each story deepened Lauren's resolve. But with the influx of support came challenges. Clearing the lot was grueling work, and the old shed collapsed during their first attempt to repair it. Claire organized a fundraiser, but the donations trickled in slowly, far less than they needed to cover the garden's restoration. Lauren found herself at the city council meeting a week later, heart pounding as she stood at the podium. Behind her sat a group of supporters, including the elderly man from the lot and several others who had once been part of Green Haven. Toby lay at her feet, a calming presence as she addressed the council. This garden is more than just a piece of land, she began. It's a legacy. It's a reminder of what we can accomplish when we come together. The Green Haven project gave people hope, and it has the potential to do that again, if we're given the chance. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them, a middle-aged woman with glasses perched on the tip of her nose, leaned forward. MS, Carter, we understand your passion, but restoring a project like this requires significant resources. Can you provide proof of its historical and community significance? Lauren nodded, opening the chest and carefully removing its contents. This is what we found buried in the lot, she said, her voice steady. Margaret Hayes, the founder of Green Haven, kept meticulous records of the garden's impact. These photos, letters, and plans show not only what this garden meant to the community, but also how it could thrive again. The woman examined the items, her expression softening. This is compelling, she admitted. But even with documentation, funding is limited. You'll need to show that this project has widespread support. Lauren straightened. We already have volunteers ready to help, and we're organizing a community event to rally more. All we need is a chance to prove this is worth saving. After a tense pause, the woman nodded. Very well. Submit a detailed proposal, and we'll consider it in next month's meeting. As Lauren walked out of the council chambers, a wave of relief washed over her. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. She knelt to hug Toby, who wagged his tail enthusiastically. We're one step closer, boy, she said. Now, let's make it happen. The day of the community event dawned bright and clear, with a soft breeze carrying the scent of spring. Lauren stood at the entrance to the Green Haven lot, her heart pounding as she surveyed the scene. Volunteers bustled about, setting up tables and displays, while neighbors trickled in with shovels, plants, and eager smiles. Children ran through the overgrown paths, their laughter ringing out like a promise of renewal. Toby stood beside her, his tail wagging furiously as he greeted every newcomer. He had become the unofficial mascot of the restoration effort, and it was hard not to smile at his infectious energy. You ready for this? Claire asked, walking up with a clipboard and a coffee in hand. She looked over the crowd, her grin wide and confident. Because I think the whole neighborhood showed up. Lauren laughed nervously. Ready as I'll ever be. As the event began, Lauren took the stage, or rather, the makeshift platform made of old pallets. She looked out at the gathering of people, their faces filled with curiosity and hope. Taking a deep breath, she held up the old photograph of Margaret Hayes. This garden once stood as a symbol of hope, a place where people could come together to grow not just food, but community, she said, her voice steady despite the emotion building in her chest. Thanks to all of you, we have the chance to bring it back, to make Green Haven a part of our lives again. Applause erupted, and Lauren stepped down, letting the community take over. Groups formed to clear debris, plant flowers, and rebuild the broken trellises. Claire organized a raffle to raise additional funds, while a local musician strummed cheerful tunes on a guitar. As the hours passed, the lot began to transform before Lauren's eyes. What had once been a forgotten wasteland now buzzed with life and purpose. Neighbors shared stories over wheelbarrows of mulch, and strangers became friends as they worked side by side by side. Lauren spotted the elderly man who had first told her about Margaret Hayes. He was leaning on his cane, directing a group of teenagers as they painted a new sign for the garden. The sight made her heart swell. By late afternoon, the transformation was undeniable. Rows of flowers and vegetables now lined the once barren soil, and the trellises stood tall, ready to support new growth. The air buzzed with excitement and pride as the community stepped back to admire their work. Lauren wiped her hands on her jeans, exhausted but exhilarated. Toby ran up to her, his fur dusted with dirt but his eyes bright with joy. She crouched down to hug him, burying her face in his scruffy fur. "You did it, boy," she whispered. "You brought us here." As the sun began to set, casting the garden in a warm golden glow, Lauren gathered everyone for a final moment of reflection. She stood under the old tree where they had discovered the chest, holding one of Margaret's letters. This garden was built on the belief that together we can create something beautiful, even in the face of hardship, she said. Today we've proven that belief still holds true. Thank you for being part of this journey. The crowd erupted in cheers, their voices echoing through the transformed space. Lauren felt a wave of gratitude and pride, knowing this was only the beginning. Later that evening, after the last volunteer had left and the garden stood quiet under the stars, Lauren sat on the bench beneath the tree. Toby curled up at her feet, his breathing slow and steady. She looked around at the revitalized space, the culmination of weeks of effort and the unwavering support of a community she had only begun to know. For the first time in years, she felt at peace. The garden wasn't just a restored piece of land, it was a second chance for everyone involved, herself included. And as she ran her fingers through Toby's fur, she knew she'd found her purpose. "Thank you," she said softly, looking down at him, "for everything." Toby wagged his tail, as if to say, "You're welcome." The Greenhaven garden was alive once more, its roots anchored not just in soil, but in the bonds of a community that had come together to make it thrive, and Lauren, with Toby by her side, was ready to nurture it for years to come.